Hello, everyone, and welcome to War of the Stars, a Star Wars podcast, coming to you as always from deep within the Outer Rim, far beyond the watchful eyes of the Galactic Empire. My name is John Mark Tolley, and joining me as always is my co-host, Will, aka Mr. Darth Tuba. Will, how are you today on this fine evening?
Right, sons, I am doing really well on this beautiful Wednesday evening. How's the weather out by you these days?
It was rainy this morning, but right now it's I'd say probably in the 60s and 70s. So it's been rather nice last couple of days. Not too hot, not too cold, but just good spring weather. So
Very good. Yeah, so it was a beautiful day out here today, although we look like we're getting cloudy now and we're supposed to have some rain tomorrow. But that's okay because it's very green and lush and we need rain for that to happen. So
yeah,
we're okay.
Definitely love this time of year with the green coming out and all the plants and everything.
So before we get going with our topic, did you see the Vanity Fair article?
I did not read
cover?
I saw the cover.
Right.
I saw the cover. That was pretty cool.
I always love the Anne Leibovitz. I love when she comes in to do. She's been doing the photos for the Vanity Fair magazine for all the movies. I mean, I think she's done them. She said she's worked 40 years with them. So I don't recall the ones for the original trilogy, but I know that she was doing the prequels and then the sequels. And it was so cool the way that they set up. For those who don't know what we're talking about, they put this really cool spread of characters on the front cover of the upcoming Vanity Fair. And it included The Mandalorian. It included Boba Fett. Or no, not Boba Fett. Mandalorian, Ahsoka, Obi-Wan, and Cassian Andor. Which I just thought was, because these are the upcoming, all the upcoming series that we're going to be seeing. And I just thought that was really very cool. I'm really kind of, I have to say kudos to Lucasfilm and Anne Leibovitz for utilizing this kind of summer of Star Wars, but in streaming. Normally this is the kind of thing that we see happen a few weeks before a movie release, but instead we're getting it with a series, series of series. So very, very cool. And that kind of ties into our topic because it's just it's amazing to see how this, we look forward to this kind of thing. Like, it's not quite the same as when it was a movie, but when a movie release would come out, whether it was a sequel or a prequel or even the original, there was all of this hype and excitement everywhere you looked. There was news reports, there were special magazine covers, there was food promotions, everything. It truly affected the culture around us.
Well, even I mean, and we'll get into this more in depth as we go on, but it goes even further than just one part of culture. Whether you're a Star Wars fans or not, there are certain things that people know about Star Wars. Whether you've seen it or not, Darth Vader. People know who Darth Vader is. Even politics has got into it. I mean, what was it in the 80s? You had the Star Wars program.
Yeah.
The self-defense.
Which confused the crap out of me when I was a kid because I'm like, wait, what? Star Wars? Is it for real now? Is it not? I mean, because that freaks me out. I'm like, wait a minute, is there going to be a Death Star? I didn't,
But yeah, I mean, it's just so ingrained into society, especially Western society. I think to probably the world too, but especially here in America, America and Canada, it's so ingrained in the culture.
Oh, absolutely. And the thing is that it's not one thing, not one part of the culture. It's part of, it's kind of found its way into, every aspect, from, like, there was a great, last celebration, Star Wars Celebration, which we'll talk about, but the last Star Wars Celebration that there was, there's always an exhibit that's put on by Steve Sansweet from Rancho Obi-Wan. And I believe at the last one of the ones that had happened, what they had done was, I think it was it was celebrating The Empire Strikes Back,
Mm.
and I think it was Empire Strikes Back, and they they basically made a mock-up of a boy's bedroom. Well, I shouldn't say little boy's bedroom. Could be a girl's bedroom, but a child's bedroom, and it was basically all decked out with vintage Star Wars items: Star Wars bed sheets, Star Wars curtains, Star Wars towels, Star Wars, cup and saucer, toys, clothing, everything in the room. If it wasn't nailed down, was something with Star Wars, and it just kind of shows you there's a thing right there, that how the whole idea of it has kind of permeated into every aspect of life.
Oh,
And it's
yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah, definitely.
And I don't know of too many things that have done it quite to the extent, or if they did it. I mean, I think the closest next one would be Star Trek.
Mm-hmm.
But Star Trek, I feel, definitely had, at least in its initial form, I think Star Trek, and I love Star Trek, by the way. People know that. I'm a big Trekker or Trekkie. I watch all of the original series, Next Generation, a lot of them. But I feel that Star Trek did have a little bit of a smaller audience, a little more of a niche audience. And then when Star Wars came out, it was just a little bit more global. It was a little bit more something for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Oh, definitely. And I think, in that vein, I've said this before in other episodes we've done. When you look at the impact in the type of people that were impacted by Star Trek and Star Wars, you hear the stories all the time in Star Trek about, I became an engineer because I saw Scotty working in there. I became a doctor because I saw Bones. So you see this more geared towards and people being influenced in the scientific field. I think in Star Wars, you're going to have a lot more people that said, I got into special effects because I watched Star Wars. I became a writer because I watched Star Wars. I became an actor, or I became something in the movie industry.
Well, think about it this way. When do we, why did we become, as a society, interested, or in some ways interested, in how movies were made? Think about, before 1977, there was not a lot out there. There wasn't like a making of Wizard of Oz.
Yeah,
no documentary. There wasn't a making of Gone with the Wind. There wasn't a making of, there was none of that. None of that existed. People went to the movies. They enjoyed the escapist fantasy of the film they were seeing, and they went home and they felt satisfied. But when Star Wars came out, there was this amazing interest in, how did they do that? Yeah. How did this happen? I want to do that. I mean, it was probably one of the first times that I can recall in my life as a child sitting in a theater and looking at those credits that were rolling at the end, and really, and now, of course, thank you, John Williams, because that was part of the reason why I stayed there. And at the time I couldn't articulate that, but I was looking at all the people like, oh my God, there's, oh, look, there's a caterer. Like, oh, look at all the people. Look at what has to happen to put this movie together. And that, I think, we had three. We had the making of Star Wars, which is, have you ever seen those documentaries that came out the years the movies came out? Oh,
I probably have. I'll have to watch. Them.
Well, the making of Star Wars was so phenomenal. It was about an hour long, and they were all things you'd see on TV. And I remember my local video rental place had it. You could rent it. So I would rent it, and then I found out you could buy the certain movies. So I ended up purchasing it, and it was so cool because it was narrated by William Conrad, who was an actor and voice actor from the 70s, and he had this really dark voice. He used to do a lot of the NFL, like football stuff, and it was really cool to have his voice there. And then, but 3PO and R2 were also kind of there, and they built this little set, and they kind of were there too, talking about it. And you got to see behind the scenes footage, and it was so cool. And there was alternate takes and amazing stuff. And then they came out with, when Empire Strikes Back came out, they did SPFX, The Empire Strikes Back, hosted by Mark Hamill. And it wasn't just about Star Wars, but it was about the old movies of the 50s, the sci-fi movies, and all this other cool stuff that influenced filmmakers at that time. And then when Return of the Jedi came out, since it was a lot about creatures, they had a special called Classic Creatures Return of the Jedi. Mm-hmm. Most of these things you can find on the Blu-ray, I think, the Blu-ray box set of the 6 movies.
Yeah.
But I think you can find some of the stuff even just on
I'm sure,
on YouTube. And then it came out a few years later in the late 80s with From Star Wars to Jedi and the Making of the Saga, which was again narrated by Mark Hamill, and it was a little bit more broad, but mostly Return of the Jedi, but it was more broad with 3. It was such a cool thing. And then the floodgates were open when DVDs came out. Then they had special features and extra and little documentaries, and it's just now all movies are getting into that. So
well, I think all you have to look at when you're looking at the impact of Star Wars as a movie franchise, it pretty much set the standard for the blockbuster.
Yeah, well,
I
would think Jaws. I think Jaws kind of
Jaws
was the first.
Yeah.
I think, but Jaws was more leaned a little bit more towards horror, where so it wasn't bringing in the youth crowd. So Star Wars really did bring in that whole family.
Yeah. That's true. Yes. And
of course, it was going to be a G rating, right? And then they, what was it? I think that's one of the reasons why you see Walrus Man's hand get cut off. They didn't want a G rating. They wanted a PG rating. So poor Walrus Man had to. Hunter Baba had to sacrifice his little arm.
Oh, yeah.
But so not only did it affect the culture area of filmmaking, but and all of a sudden people were interested in all of these different things. It reinvigorated it. The movies were dying out.
Well, especially sci-fi, it invigorated the sci-fi genre.
Yes,
and made it that a viable. The questions. Will we have had some of the movies that we had, both good and bad, that came after Star Wars?
We would not. I don't think we would have had we would not have seen as much of an impact with Star Trek.
That's what I was just going to ask.
Yeah.
If Star Wars had not been a success, would Roddenberry have tried to go forward with Star Trek the Motion Picture?
Well, I will tell you that it was going to be Star Trek Phase 2, which was going to be a whole another series. And then Star Wars came out, and then all of a sudden, I don't know whether it was Roddenberry or if it was Paramount, but somebody flipped it and just said, no, let's get this out and just make a movie instead.
Yeah.
And they did. So, and then that kind of spawned off more movies, and then, So yeah, I think it definitely is something to be considered. You know. So,
and they also showed that sci-fi didn't necessarily, because a lot of the sci-fi at the time, right before that, and even a little bit, maybe a little bit after it, tended to be could be a little campy. You had like Buck Rogers, you had
even Battlestar Galactica back then.
Battlestar Galactica
was pretty hokey. Anyway, so there's a lot of different, so it definitely inspired the sci-fi genre. Mm-hmm. It inspired and influenced the business of movie making and the money aspect of it. So much so that maybe that, and sometimes these impacts can sometimes not always be considered good impacts. When there's been
not just even movies today. We watched the recent new Doctor Strange movie, and as we're movies ending, we're watching through the credits because it's a Marvel movie.
Wait for the end credits, right?
You have to wait for the end credits, and we're going through, and I notice I'm looking at all the people. Then it comes to Industrial Light and Magic, all the different Skywalker Sound. And I'm like, even today, Lucasfilm is in any special effect movie with special effects, which is pretty much every movie now. Even if it's not an action, even if it's not a sci-fi or fantasy or action movie, it's going to have some sort of special effects and sound effects.
You can put anything in there. Yeah,
it's going to have Industrial Light and Magic and Skywalker Sound.
If Star Wars was the movie that made ILM, and which in turn is the movie that made pretty much our childhood, and many people's, like, just many pop culture. It has since gone there, so it like dominoed into so many other things.
Well, and there's so many things, even kind of in the periphery, that are part of like my childhood that I remember because of Star Wars or connected to Star Wars in some way. The THX,
yep, the Zoom.
Even the watching the old Star Wars movies, and now you can watch it now that Fox has the
the Fox fanfare.
That dun, dun, dun. To me, that was part of the Star Wars experience, was hearing that dun, 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 and then going into a long time, it
was just part of it.
It was, and even to the point that when the sale initially happened, and for a while you had that taken away, where you didn't have that fanfare, it was like, I don't know, just something was missing. It was just it's like, this is awesome, but there's something missing. I don't know what it is. And then I watched it with the fanfare again. I'm like, that's it.
Yeah, that's what's missing.
That's what's missing.
Now, and while the fanfare was even on, a lot of the soundtracks, that for the first 6 anyway, the fanfare was actually part of the soundtrack. It's like, so yeah, of course it was a part of that. So just a quick mention, because we talked about this entire thing last week. You can't mention, it's Star Wars influence on pop culture without talking about parodies. And, just a preface for anybody who's just stumbling across our show, go to last week's show. We talk all about Star Wars parodies. I mean, everything from the parody movies to shorts to old and new, to Weird Al Yankovic's Yoda and the Saga Begins, and tons and tons of stuff. So, again, we were talking about, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, and it's a great episode. So check it out. But you were mentioning at the start that there are probably people in the world who have never seen Star Wars, who can recognize characters like Darth Vader, Chewbacca, R2, 3PO, Luke, Leia, Han, especially the older ones, because and the younger ones too. Like, and that's something that's interesting now. One of the things I wanted to talk a little bit about was how time and aging can affect the opinion, the generalized opinion. Look at all the people that are extremely excited for an Obi-Wan Kenobi TV series.
Oh yeah.
And not just for Obi-Wan, but for Hayden Christensen returning. Now, I remember a different thing being tossed about on the internet about the prequels. You probably remember that too.
Oh yeah.
And it was not pleasant. And at best, it was critics were very critical of the prequels. And then at worst, it was downright, sad and bullyish and immature, and just people that simply did not like what George Lucas did. And you raped my childhood, blah, 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 blah. There's a story, there's a mockumentary called The People versus George Lucas. I have never watched it. I refuse to watch it. I refuse to give it a view or any kind of money to watch it. So because I think it's just stupid, and I think it's not. I think it's just pandering to people who like to hate, but and people who like to capitalize on hate, which is the most important. Which is the thing I really don't like. You don't like a movie, that's fine. I don't. Your opinion is your own. That's fine. But it's when you try to make money off of it. You know what I mean? And that's what so many people are doing now with things like this, with podcasts and whatnot, and websites. But then you look and you see what happens. Fast forward 20 years from the ends of the prequels, and what do we see? Now we have all these people that were kids that are now adults, working, contributing to society, adults, who actually, the prequels are their Star Wars.
Oh yeah. It's
their trilogy. Now, I don't mean to say that like it's not something that we old guys can't like. It's just that I enjoyed the prequels immensely. I thought I had no negative issues to say. I mean, there were certain things about all the Star Wars movies that I could say, well, that doesn't I use the term, it doesn't resonate with me that much, but
Mm-hmm.
but not the movie as a whole. I've loved every Star Wars movie that's come out, and I just find it interesting that the people who are now the adults, the young adults, maybe the demographic, are really excited, really hyped for this TV series that has going to have prequel characters.
Yeah.
And, I credit a couple of things. I credit Lucasfilm for the creative process that they've done for the past 20 years with the Clone Wars, with Rebels, with things that have softened up the public to the idea of the prequels and the prequel characters.
Oh yeah, I definitely think that.
I think that was a brilliant move, and it was George Lucas, Dave Filoni, whose favorite character is a prequel character, Plo Koon, of all people. That's his favorite, Plo Kool. So, and you see that, and you see how that these kids who grew up with it, and again, as a teacher, I remember teaching kids who went to see the movie, and it was great, we loved it, and then I'm hearing adults complaining about it. I'm like, well, maybe there's something to that. There's been some great interviews with Ewan and Hayden, both saying that it's nice to hear the love of the prequels now, because they really weren't getting that. That wasn't coming through in 99, 2002, and 2005. So it's amazing to see that change, which makes me be very hopeful that all the hate that we get, that there seems to be on some of the sequel trilogy, will be out shouted by those that love it, meaning the kids of the younger generation of today that's going to be older and will get their websites going and start doing that. So
yeah, definitely.
But another thing that happened with the culture, that the Star Wars and the pop culture and the Star Wars and culture in general, is the idea of truly what it means to be a fan of Star Wars, and how many different ways you can express your love of Star Wars. I mean, right now, here we are, you and I, doing a podcast.
Well, going back to the prequels, and because I obviously wasn't really old enough to have been there during the original run. I was just a wee lad at the time, but I definitely remember the prequels coming out, and for some reason I don't remember this so much when the sequel trilogy came out. It could have been the different technology. You could buy your tickets online, but the idea I love the idea of waiting in line with all of these people. I mean, I'm waiting in line. You're waiting in line, and it's just a joyous atmosphere. Everybody, in fact, I have a story for the first time for watching not Force Awakens, but Phantom Menace for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd just gotten off work, and the movie theater didn't do a midnight showing. It did like an early morning, 7 a.m. showing.
Oh, okay.
And they had a radio station out there, and the tickets were sold out, but they still had tickets to give away. And they asked them to do the contest was you had to do your best Yoda voice. And I won, and I got the free ticket. But
now, how old were you then? How old were you in 99?
Let's see, I'm 44 now. So
you were 21?
21. Yeah, I was 21.
Yeah.
I was playing 21. But still, that one and all the other movies, waiting in line and having all these people there that are from different backgrounds, different cultures, different ethnicities, different religions, different political backgrounds. All of these people who would probably never be together other than that, but we have one thing in common. We all love Star Wars.
Right.
And just bringing all these different people together was just so cool, and having conversations and not being intimidated by wondering oh, that person likes Star Wars. I think when they look like they might like Star Wars, you're like, no, you know that person next to you like
Right.
Star Wars because they're waiting in line for 4
Right.
hours to go see Star Wars.
Well, I can tell you, I was old enough to remember the original releases of all three. Although I will say that my first I only have like for Star Wars Episode 4, well then just called Star Wars. I think the line forming for both the original trilogy and to a lesser extent the prequel trilogy was sometimes it was essentially in that sense because there may not have been as many theaters. They didn't have the multiplex idea coming into play, except in the big cities. That wasn't really happening in like more rural areas. So I had one theater, one film, one big, huge, old-fashioned theater. Sorry to say, it's so sad. It's like it's a Walgreens now, but at the time, it was the one theater in our town. Yeah. And I remember having images. I was 6 years old, maybe 5, going on 6. And I went in and I remember going to the theater. We parked in the thing, and there was a line going. It was just this big. Imagine like one big, huge building that was like kind of, bird's eye view, was like oblong in shape or whatever, and the people were just lined up all the way around the theater. So we had to get in line, and I just remember as a little kid being like, it was great and fun and exciting, but I was also stressed because I did not know. I said, my dad had told me, he said, look, we're going to get in line, and if we can't get into this film, we're going to have to come back and see it another day. Because there was like a 7 o'clock and like a 9:30. Well, we ended up getting in to see it, and it was fine. And I remember the same thing for Empire. I remember the same situation. We were at a birthday party for my friends, and it was about 6 or 7 of us. And I went in, and I remember having to get in line for that. And again, it was nerve-wracking. I was lucky enough to get in just to get to get into that first grouping. Otherwise, you just waited to the next film, But we went during the day for the birthday one, so that was pretty likely that we get in. And then Return of the Jedi. By then, we had a multiplex, and it wasn't much as a need for getting online. Now, I didn't wait online for the movie tickets for the prequels. But what I did wait online for, and I want to kind of segue into this, I waited online at Toys R Us because there was this little thing that started happening, thank you to the prequels, to Episode 1, called Midnight Madness. And essentially what they decided to do was do a full release of all Star Wars Episode 1 related product on the same day. Mm-hmm. And it was, I forget, it was like maybe 3 or 4 weeks before the movie came out. Yeah. And it was just a solid, I think it was 3 weeks. And it was the midnight of May the 1st or something like that. They weren't doing the May the 4th thing quite then yet. But I remember my friend and I went to the place, and it was like to the Toys R Us. There's a Toys R Us about 25 minutes, or was 25 minutes from my home. And we got in line, and there was like, probably 30, 40 people ahead of me already. And I got there at like 11. So by the time we got to like, 11:55, there were people going around the building. So there was several hundred people there. And you got to give it up for Toys R Us. They made it like a big party. They had the music playing. They had people wearing Star Wars masks. They had cake for everybody. They had a big sheet cake. And they were giving out free posters and things of that nature. But if you recall, Episode 1, there was a lot of hype for The Force Awakens. I am not going to deny that. That was a hugely hyped movie, mm-hmm. and it permeated everywhere in pop culture. But if you had to crown the king of hype, you give that crown to Episode 1. Oh, just yeah. the amount of product. Everywhere you looked. First, there was Toys R Us. Aisle after aisle after aisle of just that sea of red carded figures. People walking in with, I walked in with a shopping cart, and it was like, do. Yeah, $400 I spent on that. I remember that. I never spent $400 in my life on anything. But it was a lot, and $400 went a long way back in 1999. That was a lot of figures.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And not to mention, there were 6-inch figures. There was 3-inch figures. There were 12-inch figures. There were masks. There were, all sorts of stuff. And then Then there was the food premiums. Let's talk about, PepsiCo had this $4 billion deal. Think about that for a minute. The amount of money that Lucasfilm, or no, maybe it wasn't $4 billion. Might have been just $1 billion. Sorry, just $1 billion. But
just
PepsiCo,
$1 billion.
yeah, just $1 billion. PepsiCo signed a deal with Lucasfilm to help, market the movie, and it was, PepsiCo owns Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, Kentucky Fried Chicken. So not your top three, not your top fast food, but pretty high.
Yeah.
And they released they didn't do something little. They released like 20 something toys from each restaurant, and they released cup toppers, and they released, then the pizza boxes had imagery on them, and the bags, and they had a scratch off like games that you could win, like a Hummer, a Star Wars themed Hummer. There were all these different promotions. You could go in, and then PepsiCo was there with the Pepsi cans, and oh god, that one, I swear I contracted type 2 diabetes thanks to episode 1, because you didn't just go and buy like a 6-pack of soda. You had to buy the case of 12 to get one character that was on the can. And there was Pepsi, and there was Diet Pepsi, Pepsi One, and Mountain Dew. And you had to buy, and each character, each box, or each of those different sodas had like, I think there were 24. No, yeah, there were 24 different characters that you could find.
Yeah.
But you had to buy a case of 12. Is it 12? 6? No, you had to buy a case of 24 for one. So you had to buy that 24 times. Oh my God. It was like, and it would come out each week. I mean, we were stressed out beyond reason, and yet we were having the best time.
I'm sure.
It was going everywhere. And I mean, and the funny thing is that these days, I mean, I've kept some things. I kept one set of Pepsi cans. I kept the pizza boxes. I did not keep the toys, the fast food toys. I ended up selling them off because, I mean, they were great, but they just took up so much room. There was so much. Oh my God! And then I think about it. I'm really waxing nostalgic here. How fun that was. Everywhere you look. Oh yeah, cereal boxes and Lay's potato chip bags. I mean, there was just all sorts of stuff. Yeah. Remember for episode 2, they had Go-Gurt. Remember, what Go-Gurt is, right? Like,
oh yeah,
it's
my,
like in
my daughter still has.
Well, Mark, somebody who worked for Go-Gurt had a brilliant idea. Hey, you think these tubes of Go-Gurt, they kind of look like lightsabers. So of course you had to collect for episode 2. They had like 12, collect all 12 different types of lightsabers. There was Obi-Wan's lightsaber. There was Mace Windu's lightsaber. There was Anakin's. There was Kit Fisto's. There was like all this stuff. Oh my God.
Well, one thing going off on toys that really changed with Star Wars, because I think it was the first time where this happened, where before it seemed like the toys influenced the show or the movie. Like the toys would come first, and then like you had the Transformers. Transformers came first, then the cartoon came after the Transformers.
Well,
G.I. Joe, but Star Wars was one of the first times that I can remember where you had the movie first, and then the toys came afterwards.
Well, I'll tell you how that kind of played out. There was not a lot of success with toy tie-ins to movies up until that point. Yeah. But they did have it. I mean, the Planet of the Apes had it. There were those Mego, like 8-inch figures that existed. They want to talk about a mega crossover. They had both the Marvel and the DC license. So you had Marvel characters like Iron Man, Thor, and Captain America and Spider-Man playing along with Batman and Robin and Superman. It was, in our mind, that's why like a lot of us people my age, I'm like, that's the movie I want to see. The whole Avengers thing is great, but let's get Avengers versus DC. Anyway, I digress.
But that, and I also remember seeing the picture of the old Star Trek toys. They would have the Spock helmet with the flashing light.
Yes.
You're like, where was that?
That was an example, and Star Wars did this too. And I'll talk about that a little bit. That was an example of the Star Wars, or the trying to find product that you already had, like a toy company
Mm-hmm.
that had existing product that they felt they could make it sort of work, and if they slap a Star Trek label on it, while it was kind of a placeholder while they were making the more accurate toys.
Yeah.
But yeah, the thing that happened is, Lucas wanted the rights to the toys.
Mm-hmm.
He knew that if he was going to sell this picture, if he was going to be able to fund it, he needed to do marketing with all this stuff. So he did, and lots of stuff like puzzles and T-shirts and pajamas and all that stuff was like not a problem. But nobody wanted to take on the toys. No, Mattel said no. Hasbro said no. Entered this little tiny like nobody company, famous for the Easy Bake Oven, Kenner in Cincinnati, and they said, "Oh, we'll do it, sure." And they're like, "Okay, cool." So, but they were late to the party, so Kenner was late getting to it, so they were not able to get the toys made in time. So that's where two very famous things happened. The first one was what they called the empty box campaign, where at the Christmas of 77, there were no Star Wars toys. There were no figures ready.
Mm-hmm.
So what they did was they basically put out a campaign where you could buy this little card, and it had the pictures of all 12 the first 12 figures to be released, and it was like a little certificate, and you paid for that, and then you send this little card in, and they would mail you 4 figures. I think it was Chewie, Luke, R2, and Leia. I think it was the 4, and they would send them to you, in March. So that's when finally the figures were able to be released. So it was a very successful campaign. They basically sold nothing, and they got millions and millions of dollars for it. But then the floodgates opened when, of course, Kenner started making the toys, and it was crazy. The other big thing that happened was what I mentioned before. There are things that you can get. There was another TV show. Have you ever heard of the $6 Million Man?
Yes.
Well, that was pretty popular with kids. It came out in the early 70s, and they did create some toys. They did create some play sets and things like that. Well, that was Kenner. They scrambled to utilize some of those things, like a transistor radio headset that kind of looks like what we're wearing. It would be like, there's no wire, but it just was like this, and you could put a little antenna here, and you could they had a little, they'd all had $6 Million Man stuff on it. Well, they slapped a Star Wars thing on it because it looked like something Luke would wear, while he was flying the X-Wing. So they sold that. They didn't have blasters, but they sold like a pretend ray gun and a belt, and they sold it as a Star Wars, utility belt. And it was something else. And they recycled. There was a whole Flying Aces target game. It was like a video, not a video game, but this kind of target game that was like in a big unit like this, and you operated a little machine gun like it was World War I Flying Ace kind of thing. They turned that machine gun into a blaster, and now it was the X-Wing target game, and those things are very valuable today, all of those toys. And Star Wars did influence and I got to give some props to Kenner, because both Star Wars and Kenner did influence how toys were made. The 3 3/4 inch line was not a very popular thing, meaning the figures that were this big. Most, think about it. Before that, it was the 8 inch, like Mego or G.I. Joe had the 12 inch.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, Bernie Loomis comes up and said, "Let's make them this big." He's the guy from Kenner, and he does that. And in addition, they were using these Fisher Price, like little people, to make mock-ups, which are about that size. And that's decided somebody got the bright idea, because you make the figures that small, now you can make creatures and small vehicles and big vehicles like the Millennium Falcon. If you try to do a Millennium Falcon with a 12-inch figure,
you're going to have
it's going to be, it'll have to double as your kitchen table. So, Kenner, via Star Wars, earns a gold star for influencing how toys were created and sold. Think about all the action figures that came out after that.
Yeah, because I only remember playing. I had a 12-inch G.I. Joe, but it was an old one. Mm-hmm. But most of the GIs I had were
which was a direct response to Kenner's Star Wars action figure size. In fact, the irony is that Kenner also made a 12-inch line of figures, about 12 or 13 of them, back when Star Wars: A New Hope came out, and they didn't sell well, ironically. So they now and now, of course, but part of it was that they were very low point of only 5 points of articulation. They were very basic. Now, but right before the prequels came out, they started creating nicer ones, and now they've turned that license over to Sideshow Collectibles, and they do these really beautiful ones, which I've collected. So there's some pretty cool stuff. But yeah, so that's. And that's just toys. I mean, let's talk about like every other and toys and fast food premiums and stuff. I mean, let's talk about all the other areas of like just like everyday living. From tablecloths to towels to clothing to underoos. Have you ever had underoos? I mean, that's it's permeated every aspect of your life, which is why I love that display that Steve Sansby from Rancho Obi-Wan put up at Celebration, because it's just an amazing thing to think that every aspect, from the spoon that you eat your cereal to the cereal that you're eating, is affected by that. So speaking of Star Wars Celebration, okay, let's talk about the growth of the fan convention. Now, Star Wars didn't create a fan convention.
No.
That trophy has to go to Star Trek.
Yeah.
Okay. I've been to Star Trek conventions. They were the way they kind of worked was they were mostly Star Trek, but also other things too. And Star Wars was always kind of along for the ride, just like any other, like Battlestar Galactica or Buck Rogers or anything else. But Star Wars then really took to Lucasfilm decided to say, let's make when Episode 1 came in, let's make a celebration that's all things just Star Wars, all Star Wars guests, all Star Wars vendors, all everything just Star Wars. And I don't know, that to me, they made it into a true event, and it was also to promote the new movie. So they got engaged, all this excitement. People could interact with some of this, not just the actors and the puppeteers that were in the movie itself and seen on screen, but also the people that worked on the movie. And people were going. I remember I was at a celebration. I ran into Richard Edlund. And I'm like, and I knew who he was. I was like, oh my God, it's Richard Edlund. And here's a guy that worked on Star Wars, and I got him to sign my book. Because it was. To me, he's a superstar. He's like a rock star. And, you run into these other people like that. So yeah, the fan convention really has evolved, I think. And they owe that to how Star Wars does it.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, definitely. And, I'm also looking at, we kind of touched on it, ahead of time, even outside of, I don't know, just everything. It seems like so much stuff has been influenced by it, not just what we see as far as the quote unquote nerd culture. Well, even the nerd culture making the quote unquote nerd culture popular and cool. Star Wars had a lot to do with that, because it wasn't just one group of people that seemed to be fans of it. Like you said with Star Trek and some of the other ones, the fans seem to be very, very niche oriented. It's a certain type of people, where Star Wars is, even like I said when I talked about going to watch, wait in line for the movies, it's got a much more broad scope. And it started to make it to now that, the Marvel movies are kind of the same way, where
and Lord of the Rings,
yeah, it's not just these, one type of, your typical nerd with the horn rim glasses and the pocket protector, and live.
Well, think about look at all the people, and again, I can't emphasize this enough. All right, we're not talking about just Star Wars. We are talking about Star Wars, but we're not saying that Star Wars, holds the patent on all of this. Okay, I think that a lot can be said for a lot of the other pop culture style franchises that have come out and are continuing to come out. But we're just saying that we think that Star Wars has, definitely been an influence on it. Think about, let's talk about fandom. I mean, we talked about a little bit about podcasting. We're one of hundreds of podcasts that people can listen to. And think about people that run YouTube channels all devoted to Star Wars. People that run, like fan groups really, dealing with one aspect. Like, have you ever seen an R2D2 builder's room? Okay.
No.
Dude, an R2D2. All right. Now, to give you an idea, that's a group called the R2D2 Builders Club. They are basically a group of people that are working to build their own life-size working R2D2 or droid of some sort. Mostly an astromech. And the talent that these people have. Many of them are engineers full time. Some of them work for NASA. So they not only create their own, scratch builds of these droids, they all come up with plans on how to do it. They share it out with everybody else in this community. I'm actually a member, okay, although not an active member, but about 12 years ago, now I'm looking what time we had, about 14 years ago, excuse me. I actually began the process of building an R2D2. Now, I would say at this point, it's 90% finished. But my job took over when I started running my marching band, and I've never been able to finish it. So it's in my garage, mostly finished, but I put a blanket over it, and it's now R2D2 in low power mode. Ever since Master Luke left, that's my story, and I'm sticking with it.
Take it to him.
But I had a very enjoyable time building it, and there were people that for example, one person would do what's called a run, and the hardest thing about making an R2 is the dome. So there are a lot of different ways that you can do the dome. But what some people would do is make a run, like an aluminum run, and they would go to an aluminum processing plant that could cut up a dome and do a thing. And they would say, how many people do you want to order? And then you put in an order, and then say 20 people or 40 people would want them. And then they'd make these orders, and they'd cut up these aluminum domes that look like R2, that are all cut up like R2, and then they would just mail them out to you. And then slowly, then you do things with feet, then you do things with legs, then you do things with the body, and then you do things with the skin to make it look like all the compartments. And then there are other people that's just to make it look like a standstill droid. There are people that are doing like all the different gadgets that come up and down. They have some people putting holographic projectors, making it automatically go from 2 legs to 3 legs. This is crazy, and they're so good at what they're doing that 2 of them had got hired by Kathleen Kennedy and have been the droid wranglers and builders for all of the sequel movies.
Wow!
Because even George Lucas went into a celebration one time and saw these things, and he's like looking around, like, "Where were you when I needed you?" I mean, this is incredible, Yeah. But I had to put my machine shop in on this, and they were learning how to do it. So, and then of course there's the 501st, right? The costuming club that is, and folks, to be a member of the 501st, it's serious. You got to make a movie accurate costume, and they scrutinize it. You have to send them pictures, and they got to look at it and make sure that it is absolutely movie accurate. And you get a TK number, and you get to you go to charitable events, and you go in that kind of stuff. But they do all these charities. They always come when called, but they never charge any money. So if you ever want to have a party or something, or more of a charitable event, and you'd like to have some Star Wars characters there, you can reach out to your local 501st. There's usually garrisons in like every part of the country. So, and then that spawned other cosplay groups like the Mando Mercs and the Rebel Legion. I mean, all of these different fan groups. It's incredible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow.
It's amazing. And let's talk about you. You had let's talk about religion. You had a guest on a few weeks ago, right? Isn't somebody wants to start a Jedi church?
Jedi Temple. Yeah. Jedi Temple. Yeah. I mean, it has. I mean, there's even now a Jediism. In the UK, I believe it's as classified as an official religion.
Yep.
So
crazy. Now, Francis Ford Coppola, who's very good friends with George Lucas, he told him after the first movie came out, and he's like, this thing with the Force, man, you got the potential here. You should just start your own religion. That's where the money is. And George was like, I do not want to start a religion. Thank you very much. No, I want to make movies. So,
Well, even I mean, I think a lot of times, even if you're not necessarily a Star Wars fan, people will say, "May the Force be with you."
mhm.
And it's the same thing, with like just saying something as part of, and how many times, growing up, have you tried to do the Force, pretend like you're walking, you're walking out an
There's
automatic
double
door, and you
doors that open
do the
up.
Force
I
thing.
always no. I'm
Yeah,
I'm very cool with it. I always do like I do the Ewan McGregor like little. No one's watching. I'm more stealthy about it. Another one. How about how many times? I mean, almost every sporting event, every football team, every baseball team, major league, minor league, they almost always have a Star Wars day
hmm
and a thing where you can go. And that's fun stuff. I mean, you can go there and they give out jerseys, they give out Star Wars bobbleheads with some of the players on that team.
hmm
I mean, it's really really cool. So.
yeah,
But it's a very now there's something you don't expect. These are sports fans. These are not people that I mean. There used to be a time where people that were into nerdy sci-fi movies and sports never mixed.
yeah,
But I
yeah,
think I think we've evolved away from that now, where there's a lot of cross pollination. So,
definitely.
but yeah. So and then of course um, you gotta mention Galaxy's Edge, as I always like to, and how much a themed, immersive themed area is now existing in this world, which allows people to go in and just kind of basically live Star Wars. Not I
hmm
mean for part of your day, and it's just amazing.
Yeah,
So many cool aspects
definitely.
of life, but
Yeah.
but
Well,
uh,
this
and,
has
yeah,
been this has been a fun little discussion we've had, and
yeah,
we kind of wrap things up here.
okay.
Will, why don't you tell the fine people out there where they can get a hold of you if they need to?
Well, when I'm not here with you, John Mark, I like to set myself up on YouTube and talk about the cultural impact of Star Wars on toy collecting, and with my Darth Tuba Star Wars unboxing show, which releases episodes on Wednesdays and on Sundays. And we've been having I've kind of done a lot of pre-recording because we had a huge amount of items starting to come in. These days, everything's pre-ordered when you're a collector, and there was just a big shipment of stuff that have come in over the last few weeks. So you can look forward to a lot of episodes like that. And you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Darth Tuba. I have a unboxing page, Darth Tuba Star Wars unboxing page on Facebook. And you can email me, DarthTuba77 at gmail.com.
All right. As for us right here, of course, if you want to get a hold of us, ask us any questions, comments, or if you looked at if you saw my post on Twitter, we are looking for serious inquiries on potential sponsorships. If you are interested in that, serious inquiries only, you can email us at warofthestars1@gmail.com. That is also our Twitter handle. If you want to support the show, you can do so by going to patreon.com/warofthestars, or you can hit the support button on our Anchor page. Just go to anchor.fm/War of the Stars, or you can buy our cool t-shirts at our Spreadshirt shop. Just go to spreadshirt.com/war-of-the-stars.
Still got to get a better name.
I do. You can also check us out on our Facebook group. That is where we stream live every Wednesday. Of course, we are a proud member of the Red 5 Network. Go check them out. Just search for Red 5 Network. And that will about do it for right now. So until next week, remember, this isn't just my Star Wars. This isn't just your Star Wars. This is our Star Wars. Until next week, may the Force be with you.
Tilt the spire, everyone.